Asawe Johan, Qonea Aksai, Yachtuasco dat Yakakutla Arti, Duxa, we an studel to at Lingit Renach. Hey folks, it's René, and I want to talk about where to find resources for studying the Lingit language. There are some major players who are producing a lot of materials for the Lingit language in no particular order. You have Sealaska Heritage Institute, Goldbelt Heritage Foundation, the University of Alaska Southeast, Yukon Native Language Center, and then there are entities that are making stuff in Huna, Sitka. There used to be some folks making stuff in Yakutat, and then also in Ketchikan. And so there is a ton of stuff that has been made. And so for me, it kind of comes down to there's kind of three, I guess, main categories that I tend to put things in. One is learning materials. So these are things that help folks to learn the language, whether that's a dictionary or a workbook or a grammar or some sort of worksheet or interactive sort of activity that's designed to help someone learn the language. The second thing is language use materials. And so these would be phrase books, guidebooks, things that are designed to get folks talking and give you a quick reference guide to look something up if you're trying to figure out how to say it. So there's a number of places to access resources. And so when we start talking about online resources, I guess I tend to send folks to clinkitlanguage.com. So you can find a lot of stuff through Sealaska Heritage Institute. You can find a lot of stuff through Goldbelt Heritage Foundation. And then the stuff that I have helped to develop and that I have gathered through a variety of sources, I have put onto a blog. And that blog is at clinkitlanguage.com. So it primarily links to a Google Drive, and then it also links to a YouTube channel. And so for some of the materials that I recommend folks use, I like to put these things into three different categories. And let's take a look at the website now so that we can see what these categories generally look like. So on the website, if you're looking for language learning materials and language use materials, there are probably three places I would recommend going. So the first tab I would recommend looking at is Learning Lingit. So for Learning Lingit, the most current and active tabs are Intermediate and Advanced Lingit. So if you hover over the tab, then you get a menu that pops up. And from that menu, you can select a number of different things. And some of the things that are active right now are Intermediate Tlingit, Advanced Tlingit, and the Hatuch Lachish language program. And so there's a number of different things. If you want to take a look, you can see previously recorded classes. You can see handouts that are used in those classes. You could follow along with classes that are currently going on. And then there's also at the top of each of these, especially the Intermediate Tlingit and the Advanced Tlingit, is you'll have a section that shows some recommended resources. So the recommended resources that I have on here for beginners is the Beginning Tlingit Workbook, the Tlingit Dictionary, the Tlingit Verb Dictionary, and Tlingit Enachsa. There's also a web database that was developed that has Tlingit verbs. A lot of them are already conjugated for you, and they're organized by verb root. So those are essentials to really get going in learning the Tlingit language the way that we're teaching it today. For intermediate learners, there's Hausanecha Yukatangi, which is a grammar, meaning it's a book that describes how the language functions and tries to do so in a non-linguistic manner. So it's designed for the everyday learner of Tlingit. And then there's a Tlingit reference guide, which shows what I would consider the 20 to 30 most commonly used verbs that are put into conjugations for you. So when we say conjugating a verb, usually we're talking about changing the person, so who's doing it or to whom it might be happening to, or it might be changing the way that we're talking about the verb. It did happen, it didn't happen, is happening, isn't happening, will happen, won't happen, those types of things. And then we get into the advanced materials. And so for advanced Tlingit, I think it's just a balancing act of being immersed in the language, using the language, and really getting into how a Tlingit verb works. So we have a number of materials by Jeff Lear, who's made extensive notes of Lingit verbs. So there's the Lingit stem list, the Lingit verb notes, and then from Zeus James Crippen, the Lingit Verbal Structure Handbook. So these are pretty essential. And then there's getting access to recordings of Lingit, video, audio, and so that you have stuff. Because I think they're sort of the active part of learning a language, which is doing drills, building lists of vocabulary, understanding the grammar, doing a whole bunch of translation work, and just sort of continuing to do stuff that's very active and intentional, and sort of you as the learner engaging with these materials in ways that are trying to push your fluency through your own intentional actions. But then there's what needs to happen in the background. So your subconscious does a lot of work, your spirit does a lot of work. You need to surround yourself with the language. And so in order to do that, you are the one that has to put it around you. So put it on the playlists of whatever your devices you're using to listen to music or podcasts or whatever. Just throw Lingit language into the rotation. And then check out videos, check out things that are already out there. So there's an extensive collection of conversations that were documented by Jack, Alice Taff. Those are absolutely wonderful. There's also a series called Hashagun that came out of the interior and is fabulous. And you can find a lot of these on YouTube. If you can YouTube some Lingit language stuff. We also have some learners who have made incredible language resources that we're trying to link off of through lingitlanguage.com, so you can have these big lists of videos to check out and YouTube channels to follow. There is also a collection, the Dauenhauer collection, which is 500 or so cassette tapes that were then digitized, also by Chuck, Alice Taff, and that have been made available through the University of Alaska Southeast. And then there is also the De Laguna collection, which was brought back here after she passed away by her estate to make sure that her recordings and notes are available to learners of Lingit and the Lingit peoples. So all of these things are linked in one way or another on lingitlanguage.com. You can also check out a couple of other tabs. There's resources and curriculum, which are really looking at the same thing. But when you talk about resources, it tends to go beginner, intermediate, advanced. And when you look at curriculum, it starts to look at things in terms of pre-K, K through 6, and 7 through 12, and sort of dividing things in terms of age groups, and as opposed to stages of specifically Lingit language learning. So these are the things that I recommend checking out. There's also an app that was developed by the Yakutat Lingit tribe. I believe it's only available now on Apple devices, but it has recordings in it, it has quizzes in it, it has lots of stuff. There are folks who are out there making game kits and who are making things on other similar types of platforms. And all of those, there's some efforts undergoing right now to sort of catalog these things, warehouse these things, and create access points to these things through a central location. And so there are folks who are doing that. There's a bunch of stuff that's currently being made by the Tlingit Culture, Language and Literacy Program, TCLL, and also by the Hayuk Atangi Kudi Language Nest, although those materials tend to be fairly internal, so they're used inside those programs. And we're trying to find ways to catch up with all the wonderful things that they're doing and make them accessible to the public. We also have tons of learners who are making stuff actively for their own study and to help share lessons with other folks. And that means we have experimented with a number of different ways to bring the language learning community together. So there's a Discord that's out there. There is a Basecamp that's out there, and both of those are intended to try and create new means of getting the language learning community to communicate, whether they're talking about questions that they have, resources that they're sharing, resources that they're developing, or if they're talking about trying to find ways to engage in the language. So put it all around you, put it on your devices. A number of these different things, they're PDF versions, you could download them. We have digital versions of pretty much everything that's ever been published about or including the Lingit language, which is a lot. And so take some time, check it out. If you go to the curriculum folder on lingitlanguage.com, you can click on the main Lingit language curriculum folder. That gets you to a Google Drive where you can scroll through the whole thing, download whatever you want, use whatever you want. And for me, I'm hoping it becomes a real open source type of community and feeling, and that we're able to freely share things and really make sure that people have access, and that if they're curious, that we're putting the right materials into their hands. Ego ayachwan, itu yeti owe hayukatangi, khosaku, yakki glaki, ya hadachkan kisani, has to kageye yes, ya owe, gunal cheese.